Good morning and welcome to Living in the Promised Land. This is Mark Smorley, your host. I want to thank producer Stephanie Buatois and I was going to say musical guests, but yes, I guess they're no longer guests, but thanks to Jeff Barsky and his outfit Insect Factory for the intro music, and to Pete Kovitz out of Tucson, both teachers, Pete out of Tucson, Jeff out of Langley, Tacoma Park, West Silver Spring, Maryland. Um, both longtime teachers, both great musicians, and both good friends. And so, more of my fortune to have them as friends and Stephanie as a producer. And so, you all know we have. You could call it my obsession. You can call it my attachment to Florida is very strong, and I wanted to start off with that a little bit. Because my mom passed a couple months ago, as you all know. We had the memorial last week. She lived 93 great years, the last half of her life in Florida, and much of the first right after she got married to my dad, who went to college there. And I mentioned, and we'll post that I did talk at the rally at Alligator, Alcatraz, and how, my grandparents were, refugees from uh, Eastern Europe. I mean, they were actually their family. They were married in Palestine in 1923, and came here. And my dad was born in 1931 in the Bronx, and then they left, and they went back to Palestine, and then they came back in 1938. And my grandmother was one of five, the only girl, two younger brothers, two older brothers, and her oldest brother was in the I think I have this right, was in the Russian military, because they were in Lithuania. So he was in the Russian military, in the Soviet military, fighting the Nazis. And when the Nazis took over where they were, they gave the family a choice. They gave the wife a choice. He was killed, and they said, "You either inform, or we will kill your kids and you." And so, that relative, as I found out through much family history, relatives of mine that were in Israel, who told me, no, this is the truth is she did inform. Again, horrific choices people have. One can only imagine. Her other brother and all his family was killed in the Holocaust, and she was very close to him. So I was very close to my grandmother, and I was raised, I would be the one to go over to her apartment on Miami Beach and spend the afternoon with her and her errands and her friends. And there were a lot of people in her demographic who moved down there, and it was paradise to them. It was quiet. It was reflective. They could be in a community, and they could be, for the most part, very safe there in Miami Beach. And she would, but I grew up, in the shadow of that, and I grew up with the effects of that on her. And she talked to me a bit about it, and she didn't talk to a lot of people about it. And it really had an effect on me, and it really made me, as a kid, always going to Florida, have these other attachments, and I just loved it. Then my parents moved down there in the end of my high school, and I ended up going to Miami-Dade Community College and living there for a little while, and going to the University of Florida, where my eyes opened to a lot of things in Florida. And one of the things that really, as I was, if you get a history degree there, you have to know the history of Florida. So I learned the political history of Florida, and I learned the history of activism in Florida. And Florida is by far, by far the most underrated historically state that I know. I mean, there's a lot of them that are. Just like when you go to Alabama and you see that there was a period where whites and blacks who were not part of the power structure in the late 1890s formed a progressive party and were going to win in that state. And then they were suppressed. In Florida, the Everglades protection is as much a part of the native Floridians, both Native American Floridians and, people who had settled in Florida after, recognized that this thing was too big to tame. You weren't going to pave it over completely. It was too big to tame, and it was unique and beautiful. And there was a lot of obviously it was ungoverned. So there's a lot of encroachment, to use a football term there, encroachment offsides, and people responded to it. And one of the responses was that this airstrip was built in the middle of the Everglades, as I understand it, right between the Miccosukee Reservation and this area that was state controlled, and they put this airstrip there because I mean, it's a good thing that they didn't leave this airstrip for the 80s in Florida because we know what that would have been used for. But um, the this airstrip was seen as environmentally damaging to the Everglades, and the state said no, and they turned it over, and it just the moss grew over it, and it was just there. And in the current climate where people's voices are heard less and it's more transient, what have you, and we know how Florida is governed, it became something that in 2023, this is an important history, in late 2023, Governor DeSantis declared an immigration emergency in the state, which allowed them to act on detaining and enforcing immigration law without um, oversight, without as much oversight. And so they were able to build this combined with the federal government saying, great idea, in literally within a couple of weeks. They were able to throw this prison up, like literally throw it up and build it all within like June and July of last summer. As soon as it went up, the community came out. As soon as it went up, the community came out. And that includes Reverend Jones, who is our guest today. So before I go on a lot, I want to, because I could forever when it comes to Florida and how it's uh, unique, and there's a reason people from around the world go there. We have certain things, I live in a great city, but people from around the world have great cities too. But Florida's unique. You know, mountains in the West, unique things that we have in the United States that people want to see. And I the flame is not out. It's not as publicized as it needs to be, but this week, there's a long stretch of news on it and different lawsuits. But this week, or in the last week, there's seems to be the official announcement that Alligator Alcatraz will be closing down. Tenability of it, we'll talk about in a bit. But I want to introduce Reverend Arthur Jones of the Unitarian Congregation of Fort Myers, Florida. Fort Myers is on the west coast of Florida, kind of south of Tampa. For those who it's over there, and it's Bradenton is nearby. And you don't normally think of a lot of activism coming out of there, but here it is. So, Reverend Jones, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And so we met disclosure at Alligator Alcatraz when I finally got down there last week. And one of
Yes.
the things, just quickly, is I've been to Alligator Alcatraz, not been, but I did 3 episodes and interviewed 5 different people.
Mhm.
And I went down on 2 different days, and there were only like two of the same people that were there. I went on May Day, and I went on the vigil. And so, um, Reverend Jones, you are you're the pastor, minister. What is the title?
Yes. I'm the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Fort Myers.
Okay, so what is your so we want to Reverend Jones is I don't want to do hierarchy all the time, but definitely a known person in the community who's out there in the community, has been for quite some time. And so it's important, as we do these, and again, we all feel like this is overwhelming.
Mhm.
We are fighting forces of injustice that have roll down, I'm from New England, so I use the snowball analogy. Sorry, Floridians. But you roll down and the snowball keeps getting bigger and bigger until it becomes so huge that you can't lift it up, and you just got to make it the base of your snowman and find the rest of it. And so and it just seems like, how are you going to fight this in Florida? What are you going to do? And to me, I know what summer like in Florida and the Everglades, and that people were out there all the time from the beginning, had a lot to do with shutting this down and the witnessing and these lawsuits. And we talked to people that were there last year, like Wesley, who was construction worker who could identify what was going in and people taking their notes and all of that. And so um, I want to just first I want Reverend Jones to talk about um, give his background, how he got there, and then sort of how anybody who listens to this, how anybody can play this role, and that
Mhm.
numbers matter more than volume. Numbers
Absolutely.
matter. And your buses you brought down there made the difference. People see numbers and people see awareness. And so, what was your journey to Alligator Alcatraz?
I was reached out to late last summer um, by the director of social justice initiatives for a Jewish non-secular nonprofit group based out of New York City called the Workers Circle. Her name is Noelle D'Amico, and she has become a very good friend of mine. Um, she reached out last summer because my congregation was geographically close to the Everglades detention facility. And so she was looking for partners, she was looking for congregations, she was looking for clergy leaders who might be inclined to go there for the then brand new prayer vigils being held outside the gates at Alligator Alcatraz. And when upon her invitation, I immediately said yes. And so that's how I got involved. That's how I got my congregation involved. Um, Unitarians are typically very responsive to social justice initiatives, such as the one that is made um, in light of this facility and the people being held there, the detainees, and they're being denied chaplaincy services and spiritual support services, being denied access to their legal representatives, being denied regular contact with their families, being denied the ability to have their day in court.
Now, when you say
Um,
denied chaplaincy services,
mhm,
um, I'm uh, I mean, we all know, we know that religious folks go into churches. So were
mhm.
you did you experience that? Did you try to be going as a pastor?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I am one of at least 100 clergy members that I'm aware of who signed a document verifying that they would be more than willing to go into that, physically go into that facility and provide chaplaincy services. In other words, to pray with a detainee, to read scripture with that detainee. And this was across the board. So this was a variety of faith traditions, not just Catholic. Right now, the only people who are allowed to go in to actually provide chaplaincy services are Catholic priests. Well, every detainee is not Catholic. So that's discriminatory in and of itself. If you're Catholic, you have access to chaplaincy. If you're not Catholic, you don't. So we had Episcopal priests who were willing. We had Baptist pastors who were willing. We had Buddhists who were willing.
So
We
how
had
does that
Methodists that were willing.
s-
Mm-hmm,
so how does that work? Does that work where they, because I know every prison is different,
mm-hmm,
and I'm spoiled because I'm in Maryland, so
mm-hmm,
I'm used to every denomination being covered. I'm used to seeing people coming in and out all day, but I know it's not the same in other parts of the country. And then immigration is its own weird thing here in this whole Alligator Alcatraz strangeness. So
mm-hmm.
do you do you personally contact, or was there a group of you that contacted and said you would go in, or
So I've been part of a group that has been in regular contact with the Florida Department of Emergency Management out of Tallahassee, who allegedly has oversight, supervisory oversight over the Everglades Detention Center. Okay. And so it is that office and the director of that office who has the ability to say, yes, you can go in and provide chaplaincy services, or no, you can't.
is that the
And
office
we,
that normally, that's not the Department of Corrections normally.
no, that's not the Department of Corrections. That is the Department of Emergency Management. And that is how Florida is set up. That is how the governor set it up. So we went through the proper channels and to the proper office that the governor set up. Okay. And so we said, look, we will comply with whatever standards you have. We will go through whatever specialized training you want us to. We will pay whatever fee you designate for that training. You can frisk us as we go in. We will not bring in any notes. We will not take out any notes. We
So what was the
completely,
fear? So I'm confused here because, we think of, I mean, I've never seen this and I've been in jails many times. And this is, I think, new to people who may have had loved ones in jail or, um, you know, fr they can ask their friends now whose loved one was in jail. Maybe they may not have wanted to talk about it before, but this is one of those things that, that matters. But what were they afraid of?
that is a good question.
Okay.
And insofar as I can tell, they never indicated what they're truly afraid of. Here's the thing, even in Gitmo, when we know that there were people there who had committed heinous acts against members of our military, people who had built explosive devices, people who had assaulted, in some cases killed our soldiers, even they had access to chaplaincy. On death row, no matter where you are, no matter what state, you have access to chaplaincy.
Why
Why
not?
is that different at the Everglades detention facility? Why is that different? Why are they denied chaplaincy?
I
And we
mean,
can
yeah.
never get a straight answer.
I mean, I
And
can
we
tell you,
said, look,
yeah.
we are willing to to use our vehicles, to use our gas completely free of charge. We will undergo whatever training you want. We understand that we will be supervised. We understand we will be monitored. We understand that we will be videotaped. We're fine with all of that. We just want to provide chaplaincy. And they said no repeatedly. No, you can't do it. We won't grant you that. Why? And they never said why.
So you just got a letter, like the one sentence curt letter, your application has been denied.
Actually, we've got numerous letters that said access denied. No reasoning given.
Yeah, no, this is and I can say this about, we were talking about Florida before. When I was at the University of Florida, I participated as an undergraduate student in a program where it's actually through the philosophy department where I t actually taught a course called um it was contemporary moral issues.
Mhm,
So there were 8 students and 22 inmates. And here I was, a 21-year-old junior at University of Florida, going through the jail, knocking on the pod, who's coming to class tonight? And
mhm,
the guys would say, how many girls are there? And they were not, they were segregated in the classroom, but
mhm,
and we had a class and it was only canceled once because a knife was missing. And it was, but otherwise it went smoothly. And I walked back there and students came and undergraduate students were in there with inmates and they did a class together. It was a pretty fabulous program that's since been discontinued or was discontinued soon after I left. But it was one of those things. And so I know, in Florida, even here, I was in there. And so it's, so you're not allowed in, but your Catholic brethren were.
exactly. And as someone who, throughout his college years in Atlanta as a student at Morris Brown College, taught inmates how to read at the Atlanta Federal Correctional Facility, which houses hardened criminals.
Hmm.
I know that they have access to chaplaincy. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. I heard it with my own 2 ears. I know that they could be taught literacy because I participated in that. These are not hardened criminals. In most cases, many of them have not if even been they have not committed any crimes. They have not been charged. So it's not even apples to apples. It's more like grapefruits to grapes. And to be denied that access and to be told nebulous reasons, well, we'll get into the why later, but the answer is no. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense specifically because they are not hardened criminals. And that has been acknowledged.
Well, and so then you're like, okay, I can smell something's going on in here.
Hmm.
So this timeline is crazy because literally, like, I'm looking back, I thought, wow, I did these shows so long ago, but we have to understand this whole Alligator Alcatraz from inception
Hmm.
until today is about a year.
It's almost a year.
It's
Yeah,
almost a year,
it's
and
almost a year.
the lawsuits that were there just were based on there's we talked about them before, but you've got the environmental lawsuit, which is Friends of the Everglades, and you've got the Miccosukee lawsuit, which is tribal lands and practices and all of the things that they do to live off the land that are disrupted,
Hmm.
migration patterns of the panther,
Hmm.
all of these other things, fishing disruption, and when you can see it when you go on the reservation, fishing, you can see that. And so all this stuff is disrupted and all that. And then you've got the one about access, like not just access for there, but access for lawyers, family
Hmm.
member, like the cruelty,
Hmm.
the rotten food, all these different things.
Yes. Yes.
There's all of these, and a judge put down one of the most unequivocal, strong cases after hearing lots of evidence from
Hmm.
environmental experts, while the government produced literally none, literally no expert testimony on this. And so,
Correct.
I mean, I'm used to that in immigration court because the government just doesn't put up a fight. You have to show your case, and that's the way immigration court is set up. You have to affirmatively show your case and bring your own experts and bring your country, those kinds of things. But in this court in Florida, so this judge, it was like almost a 90-page decision that I actually, you know, went through with a friend of mine who is an earth scientist. And because you have to understand that, and that was not my bailiwick. So, but it was unequivocal. And then the um, uh, uh, the decision to shut it down, like literally dismantle, shut it down immediately, dismantle it orderly, and
Hmm.
put that back to where it was.
Right.
And you know, it's kind of like Colin Powell when he say, if you break it, you fix it. You
Yes.
broke this, you harmed this, you
Yes.
before anything else, we're stopping. But then the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, they didn't reverse that. I mean, they reversed a stay. They didn't reverse the decision. So while
Hmm.
it's on appeal, which takes a very long time, the
Yes.
11th Circuit said, no, there's no emergency in what they're doing that outweighs the emergency of immigration. And so you interfering with the uh, federal government enforcing immigration law does more harm immediately than what's going on in the Everglades, which
Right.
was blow away shocking. But then you realize one of the two judges in a 2-1 decision, her husband had the services contract on it's that bad. And so now, what's happening recently, and one of the reasons it's probably still being shut down, um, that they made a decision to shut it down is that they've upped the level of not only that they upped the level of cruelty, but this is costing a ton of money. And there's
Yes.
other things that are out there that just make it's kind of like you've made your point. You didn't even build something that's sustainable. You just expanded. There's still no running water, plumbing that's adequate,
Right.
and disease ridden and et cetera, et cetera. And people are dying in
Yes.
these places. And so that's where it's sort of come as far as that goes. But um how do you so what has made I think a huge difference whether you say it or not, and it took the media a while to get out there, and it's frustrating because it's not that far. They could get down to the border, get to Harlingen for a week. They can't get an hour, literally an hour outside of Miami. Um,
Correct.
and it's an easy, it's a pretty trafficless. It's an easy drive.
It
Trust
is an
me.
easy drive.
I almost
It
ran out
is.
of gas. You get nowhere quick. But the uh but it's also, and people traverse that road. So what's amazing is that in the ability, the fans of this administration are posing with the signs. It's
Yes.
become like a meme. But nothing really organized. But you all organized from day one,
Yes.
literally from day one, because I was
Yes.
there in day one, and it was Witness at the Border, and it was the Workers' Circle,
Hmm.
and it was these organizations that brought people out. And so
Right.
um, that's the amazing thing. We'll talk about that in a sec. But I wanted to see, like, when I was asking you, how do you get there? You talked about the immediacy, but you talk a little bit. You're a kid from rural southern. I mean, I say these things speak out of. I grew up in New England. In New
Hmm.
England, people of color were in the cities. If
Yes.
you were outside of a city, it was white. It just is. It
Right.
just was,
Right.
unless you were in like an industrial town like Worcester, where, you might have had business, because it just was, because who's living in these places? These places have been the
Hmm.
same for 100 years, 200
Right.
years. So they're just,
Right.
it's just not diverse. Like
Right.
in New England, in the Northeast, in New York too, you will see, these pockets of people in different places. Whereas in the South, there was one thing it was crazy to me when I was in Gainesville was I'm driving to these rural towns and they're black. And it was like, wow, like country black folks, country, people of color, South Asians, Chinese moved into Mississippi. Like to see these things kind of blew your mind. And it's one of these sort of things in the South that people don't talk about, how these vibrant cultures and all that were in these areas. So here you were, um, growing up there, and you got to this point to Alligator Alcatraz. So what was your like awakening journey that got you there? What is your background in ministry and all?
So ministry and education are would probably be accurately described as my family businesses, or my family's business. My mom and dad are ordained in ministry. My sisters were ordained in ministry. My brother-in-law's ordained in ministry. My grandmother on my father's side had five brothers. They were all ministers.
Of what
So,
denomination?
uh, primarily Baptist,
Okay.
some evangelical, primarily Baptist.
Hmm.
There were a couple of Pentecostals in there, but primarily Baptist. That's where I got my start as a pastor in the Baptist church, missionary Baptist church. So I did that before I went through a discernment process as a candidate and an aspirant for the priesthood in the Episcopal Church. But so growing up in the Deep South, you see discrimination all the time. It's a daily occurrence. I'm old enough to have been in the third class after the state of Georgia integrated its classrooms. So I distinctly remember prior
What year was
to
that?
that would have been my first grade year was 1973. So Georgia's school systems were fully integrated in 1970. So I was 3 years. I was the
And
third
and
class
and
after that.
and how many
And
years
Georgia
after
was one of the
Brown?
last states because Brown v. Board of Education was 1953. So Georgia was in no hurry to integrate its schools, as you can tell. We were one of the last of the states to do so. So up until middle school, I was one of two, possibly three non-white children in my classrooms of 30.
Wow.
So again, I know segregation, and I know um, the injustice that happens um, when you don't have the racial equity that is required. Um, and so as I got older, grew up, um, I've always wanted to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that's how I got into activism before I even got into ministry. I was in activism in my early 20s, really before that in college. Um, I was advocating against apartheid in the 80s as a college student. I didn't get into the ministry for another 15 years or so after I graduated from college and graduate school. So I was definitely an activist first, long
Mhm.
before ministry.
Well, I mean that's it's you see it right in front, and also one of the things, when people say, yeah, but the court, people talking about, I was, as I was thinking about today's show, I was
Mhm,
thinking a lot about Brown versus Board of Education as a teaching tool. And when I started out my legal career, I
mhm,
went in, I worked for a high impact litigation nonprofit. And I
mhm,
was working on one of the, I mean, I was doing some daily things, advocacy and things for them, but the case you're working on are these educational discrimination cases from
mhm,
like the 1970s. And this
Right.
was the mid 90s. And you realize, okay, these cases drag and how they are implemented. So, we talk about Brown versus Board of Education. And I wrote a piece when University of Florida was getting rid of its DEI program a couple of
Mm.
years ago. And I wrote a piece uh, for the Florida Alligator, dusting up, when I tell people I love Florida, I feel almost more attached in many ways to their changes like that and horrified. And
Mhm.
I was very happy to use to finalize that piece with a great quote from the great Florida historian thinker Emmett Smith about that. So for those that were not who are not as old as us, Emmett Smith was one of the best running backs in Florida history, if not the best. And I saw him my senior year. His senior year was my freshman year, so I saw 1 year. I went to one game,
Mhm.
saw him, but he was legendary, and he was lamenting. And he had a great quote about that. But the reason University of Florida did not integrate, and it still has the O'Connell Center, named for the president, Stephen O'Connell, who it's the basketball arena. The O'Connell and Stephen O'Connell um, was on the state Supreme Court when there was a decision. There was a black student that wanted to enter in the late 50s, and they decided no because of the violence and unrest it would cause. And so
Mm.
people don't realize that Brown versus Board of Education was passed, but all these school districts, I mean, Virginia closed them for a year,
Mhm.
but all these school districts said, that's great. We want to do it, but we have to have the safety of everybody.
Mhm.
And you had a lot of people in like the community saying, well, what am I going to do? We can't have, we're not going to like force our ways because that endangers I mean, kids like you, I mean, it may not have been violent, but those first students that went into those schools faced traumatic violence. And we know, I mean, the hidden history of how people responded, of how people, and so when you're at an alligator Alcatraz, I mean, we don't have the immediate weight of segregation on us as that then did, and the immediate destroying of a cohesive civilization in the South, white civilization that was going to have to integrate. We have people who are disparate, driven, but violence is there. And when I was at Alligator Alcatraz, I can tell you, I'm pretty immune. I've been in South America. I've been in South America during like military coups and things. I've been like, I've had guns around me and I have this sort of weird zen. There's other things that scare me,
Mhm.
but guns don't in that way and all of that. But when I saw people driving by real fast, yelling at the little enclave rally, I'm thinking, all right, people, it's a wearing down, and this is my son asked me this morning if the U.S. was a democracy after Thomas Massey lost last night through all that
Mhm.
money because he loved Thomas Massey. And I said it's in Kentucky in the congressional race, and I said, the work needs to be done by people, not by some party, not by anything else. And so the idea they didn't, I don't think they expected protest. I think they figured they stick it way out there. There's no real area. The cops are there. People are going, and then it was almost like this vigilante mentality. And there is an insecurity, and people feel that. And so, and I think that's what happened. But I mean, your experience starting in 1970, this shows you that a court can do so much.
Mhm.
You could have, Thurgood Marshall appointed to the Supreme Court before Georgia integrated its
Exactly.
schools. I mean, if you think, I mean, that just hit me, but to think about that, you could have, um, Vietnam War in full, you could have thousands and thousands of uh, troops of color killed alongside white troops and Latino
Mhm.
troops, Asian, and everybody all together. The most integrated. I mean, I always tell people I love the veterans. Because I do a lot of stuff with military veterans and the
Mhm.
injustice done to immigrant veterans,
Mhm.
and I did a show a couple weeks ago on that. Always loved them. I think there's every war. I don't think there's one I haven't protested. Like, not one. Very anti-war, but very. And so I think but the military is one place where before that wasn't, that was kind of a last bastion of equality in its own way. And
Right.
then right now, what people can notice is, this is, they're trying to create this sort of white supremacist military police force, but that military police
Hmm.
force was already there. So part of my
Right.
contention is why is this carceral system police force there? Can you make it nice? You can have decent, now all the pleasantries are gone and the abuse is
Hmm.
there, which is why I know in Maryland they don't detain people in Maryland. I've talked about that. There's dignity not detention bill. There's immigration detention is prohibited in Maryland. I mean, the feds can set it up, but they don't set their places up. They work with the state generally. You can't do it in Maryland, but they do hold them at ICE when they pick them up for a couple of days. And the holding cell there was a whistleblower there, and and he had the quote, and one of my episodes on that is, it looked like the slave ships he saw in the pictures in grade school. And he was just a nice guy. He wasn't, and he was a guy literally they hired to oversee the detention room. He was not a guy who was in some high policy position. And he said, look, we can't do that. And then they fired him. And then he whistle blew. And there's a lawsuit. And it was a big story. And so um, the level of cruelty, there's this uptick in the level of cruelty, but
Yes.
the um, the table was set. And that's what I always say is, how did we get this table set? And
Hmm.
this alligator Alcatraz passed on there. So you went through this, and you've been a Episcopal minister. You started out Baptist, you
Hmm.
Episcopal, and now
Hmm.
you're Unitarian, which is and so talk about like how you approached your how you because you bring out a bus full of people from your mostly you were saying from the Unitarian,
Hmm.
from the church, but also from the community. So how did you bring this to your congregation? How did it work out? Like, tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, again, it's a situation where I'm never going to ask anyone to do anything that I am unable or unwilling to do myself first. So I went down there and took part in it myself
Mm.
before I asked my congregants to do it. A, to make sure it was safe. B, to make sure to get a layout of the land. And C, so I could properly prepare them so that I could describe for them what that experience was like, what they can expect. It's going to be hot. Um, but here's how we deal with the heat. We've got tents, we've got bottled water, we've got snacks. If you get overcome by the heat, here's how you deal with it. Let's get you in your vehicle. Let's get your AC going, right? We've got bottled waters. We've got medics on site in case there's a medical emergency. So we wanted to I needed to go down there first to understand the environment, the atmosphere, so that I could accurately describe it to and for my congregants before I could invite them to come. And then to say, hey, it's not enough for me to invite you. I'm going to be there with you, right? So I'm going to lead by example. I'm going to be with you, okay? Initially, my wife's got a brand new van, 8 passengers. Hey, y'all can ride with me. Anybody that wants to can ride with me. Don't worry about gas. I got the gas. I got it. Okay.
That was last year.
That was last year. Get in the van. I'll drive us down there. We're leaving together. We're coming back together. No person left behind. Right. That was before the buses. Now, initially, the first few months, August, September, October, beginning of November, we were just driving down, following each other in vehicles.
Now, when you
Right.
say driving down, how far are we talking about?
It's a 2 hour drive. It's roughly 100 miles from our sanctuary to those front gates. 100 miles. So you're talking 200 miles round trip, not exactly close. Uh, Minimum of 2 hours, typically longer, and that's not even factoring in weather. That facility is located on a single lane highway in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the Everglades, the swamp, the marsh. Okay, it's called Alligator Alcatraz for a reason. There's a ravine on both sides of US 41, and you're going to pass lots and lots of vehicles of people out there fishing. There are mosquitoes out there. There are alligators out there. There are snakes out there. There are panthers out there, right? So you gotta, it's not smart to be by yourself. If you're fishing, you should take someone with you just in case, you encounter something off the beaten path. And so that's where this facility is located. And as
And
of
it's not a,
November,
and when you say, and sorry to jump in here, but just so people know, the crazy thing about it is because when I would tell people, oh, so what's it like at the gate? Because when we did our episode from Baldwin, the biggest detention center in the Midwest,
mhm,
um, they were in the parking lot. Like it's
yeah,
as people think you're going to the jail. There's the detention center, but
mhm,
no, you're on a road, and we've shown it before.
right,
You're on the main road, and then it's off to the side. And people who visited the Everglades know that this is where if you go to it's kind of how you get to the national park offices, where but even those are much closer to the main road than Alligator Alcatraz, because this was
yeah,
a remote air. It was designed to be remote as an airstrip. So
right,
it's like
right.
what, 5 miles down this road, is it? Or how many miles? A couple miles?
So there are, if you take the driveway, that driveway goes for a mile, mile and a half, maybe 2 miles, no more than. Um, and so we are not able to go to the gates. You cannot approach the gates. There are always law enforcement, uh, facility security, state troopers. They're right there at that gate.
I mean, you can't even go down that road.
You cannot go down that road.
Right. You
You
can't.
cannot
You
turn
can't make a
around on
right.
that road. You cannot access that road. If you stand in that road, you will get a stern warning from the state troopers that are stationed on either side of that driveway. They'll say, "Hey,
24/7,
you need
right?
to 24/7." Um, this doesn't happen so much now, but in the first months, those troopers would have long lensed cameras. They would have binoculars. They wanted us to see that they were monitoring us. I don't know if that was supposed to intimidate us or not, but they wanted to be visible across the street to say, hey, we got an eye on you. And so we would tell people, hey, don't even go on that side of the road. Don't even park on that side of the road. Park on this side, right? There's no parking lot. So you're parking on the side of US 41 and you've been there. You know how those cars come through there. Some of them are flying. Some of them are far exceeding the speed limit of 55. Some are going 80, 70, 75. So we have to put up those safety cones and we are far inside those cones.
I mean,
For
think about a two-lane highway where with no lights, where there's not much traffic and there's
Mhm,
nothing in between. So everybody's going from one side of Florida to the other, and they're going
mhm,
from, Naples or Fort Myers, Bradenton from
mhm,
Miami. And so
mhm,
it's one road and you're just getting there. So of course, any of us would drive whatever the maximum is, and they're not even speeding tickets there. So,
mhm.
and people are driving in trucks, and it's a and there is no pedestrian assistance. So
No,
yes, when I
no.
parked across the street, you all were trained to say to me, "Why'd you park there? Why'd you park across the street?" I was like, "Well, I'm used to running across busy streets, but a lot of people you're not, and it's scary."
Yeah, because we're not trying to engage them in any way, right? And you've been there when we announced just before we begin the visual, hey, housekeeping. If you get a one finger salute by somebody driving by, we do not engage, right? If they curse at you, we do not engage.
And
If
it's
they
not
counter
a yeah,
protest us, we do not engage, right?
and it's not a situation where here in DC or other places where people can
Mhm,
walk by and then they may ask, or they may have an argument, but they may have like they may you have all different varieties. You have people who are there
mhm,
to just attack, then you have people who are
right?
there because they're just curious, and you have people who are
Mhm,
there who may say, well, wait a minute, don't we have this issue? And you say, this is what we think, and you're in a real dialogue, and that's where
right.
and everywhere in there is when the good stuff happens. But this has no, like, you are stopped and parked there. You're not driving by and stopping, because really there's nowhere to do that necessarily.
Exactly. There's nowhere. So if a car, I'm also, when I'm not actively leading, I am also a safety monitor. I teach safety protocols for that. And so if there's a vehicle that drives up behind us and stops, I need eyes on that vehicle because I don't know why they're stopping. It could be something completely innocent. Maybe they're taking photos or maybe they're videotaping with their phones. That's fine. They can do that. It's a free country. But maybe they have ill intentions. Maybe they're going to throw something. If so, what are they throwing? Right? And so for safety purposes, we need to locate and see what's happening just for the safety of everyone there. And so just things like that, right? We're not trying to shush anybody. We're not trying to impede upon anybody's First Amendment. They have a right to disagree with why we're there and what we're doing, but they don't have a right to disrupt us. And they don't have a right to interfere with our freedom of expression.
And the police that are across the street, even though your vigil is timed,
Hmm.
even though it's every Sunday at 4,
Yes,
even though they do not go across the street,
they do not assist us.
they don't just make any effort to demonstrate to anybody driving by that it's not okay to be violent.
They are not there to assist us in any shape, form, or fashion,
And they made
which
that
is
very
why we
clear.
have our own medics. That's why we have our own safety protocols. We used to, up until November, we used to have the state troopers there. They were there to protect us. They were there to make sure no one messed with us. But the governor's office caught wind of that and reassigned those troopers. And those troopers were among the nicest people you'll ever encounter. That got done away with by the governor's office. And so now the troopers are not there for us. And that has been made abundantly clear. They're not coming to help us under any circumstances.
Well, and that's I think that's a really important segue into repeating like one of the things because I'm very very set. There's a lot of things in this podcast, interviewing different people and all of that, but I am absolutely set that if we're gonna if we're gonna take the snow off the stove, if we're gonna melt it, if we're gonna push the brick, we're gonna push the boulder back to its uphill home and really make this country something where this doesn't when we Jews are fond of using the term never again, and I think it's appropriate here that we don't that when because look, it looks like even with the rigging and everything that elections might go towards Democrats, but the never again needs to be. You can't just back off a little bit and say, well, that was just too extreme, but we need to control the idea, to think because the I mean, immigration's a crazy thing in that even with all of this, Trump is underwater and everything, but he's underwater less on immigration. He's underwater and the change is huge, but you got people that say, okay, we just need to push back a little bit and not just be as bad. And then we're where the people are. And it's like, no, no, it's where the people have been manufactured to be, and it's been
Right.
where their jobs are. And so, when we talk about people and we talk about people not being able to be changed, and you and I were talking a little about the voting rights and the horrible decision, but one of the things that maybe could come out of it is that people
Hmm.
stop being stagnant and saying, well, these people support the immigrants because they're, but not on the border. We say this, they say that, we do this. And
Hmm.
it's like, no, I
Right.
know from when I very first debated an anti-immigrant official from a restrictionist group years ago when we were debating, and I brought up the example of, one of the guys who ran a landscaping company whose partner was one of my clients who was Mexican. And I said, that guy doesn't wake up every morning, watching MSNBC. He wants to run his business and he knows this guy is good. And he doesn't give a shit if the guy is from Mexico, Nepal, or Cleveland. It doesn't matter because he's good. And that's the way that things work. And that's why DEI is so important because you realize that, supremacy isn't there. And it enhances a community. And that's the beauty of the US. And, the only other time I was on the road was I went to Springfield, Ohio last year and to the Haitian Community Center and talked to them. And Springfield is a case where I talked about 10 years. of Haitians being there. That's kind of this point where you establish yourself into a community in the Midwest, and you kind of reestablish this community, but you're one third of it. And the younger people were very, very appalled by that because they were like their teachers, their schools, the disruptions to continue to keep like what is really essentially a white supremacy. And these institutions, you had those couple of cops, those cops left, and I've had many, many decent guards within. They're not the drivers of the ideology. And it's easy to begrudge people a job. In this economy, if you have a state job, you got a family to feed. And I know in the whistleblowing we've gotten out of Alligator Alcatraz, it's been people they fired, the woman they fired last year who didn't make it
Exactly.
through. But in a couple of others, even here where they fired the guy when he tried to say something internally in Baltimore that this is what's going on. And so it's a large thing to climb up, but people need to, that's the easy hanging fruit. People need to recognize like what DeSantis was doing and where it led. And so he then replaced them. So how are they now? They're just, hey, you take it at your risk. Sorry.
Yeah.
Wouldn't do it if I were
Basically,
you.
yeah, it's all risk is assumed on us.
Yeah.
And so we have to provide our own security. We have to provide our own safety protocols. We have to make sure that we let our people know, hey, do not engage, right? We've got watchers, we've got monitors, um, but yeah, don't engage.
So how have you so here you are, you're in Fort Myers.
Hmm.
Um, you've got your congregation.
Yes.
I know you've played a role in trying to organize in the community.
Hmm.
So how is it what are the things that has I guess surprised you in organizing in your community and the things that you think were just really surprised you in either way?
Well, one, I'm surprised by the people who are so insistent upon getting engaged, getting involved, staying involved. This past Sunday was our 31st consecutive weekend, 41st
Was that
consecutive Sun,
41st?
41st
Wow.
consecutive Sunday, and that's
Wow.
past Mother's Day, that's past Super Bowl Sunday, that's past Christmas, past Thanksgiving weekend, you know, past holidays when they had legitimate reason to be somewhere else doing something else. They chose to be there, right? We've got Father's Day coming up. If that facility is still open, we will have a robust attendance there at those front gates. And so that has very pleasantly surprised me because in the day and age in which we live, there are limitless options for things for you to do and places for you to be. So to choose to give that up, to be there, to advocate for those detainees is a beautiful thing. That's on the plus side. On the negative side, I've been disappointed and saddened by some of my clergy colleagues who want to be there, would be there if it were their choice, but they're concerned about the blowback that would inevitably happen in their congregations if they were to be there. If it were known within their congregation that they were there at the front gates of the cruelly named Alligator Alcatraz, what blowback would they get? How bad would that blowback be? How long would that blowback last? Right? And so
I
they
mean, would
want
they
to
lose
be
their
there.
job? Would they lose their
Might they
job?
lose their job? Right. In some cases, some of them would. Or if you're an Episcopal priest and your bishop, for whatever reason, doesn't see the light, doesn't understand, or doesn't agree with why you want to be there, are you willing to deal with the after effects of damaging your working relationship with your bishop? Right? Are you willing to be in trouble constantly with your ecclesiastical authority? That's a vocational question. That's a professional question, which means ultimately it's a financial question, right? Your ability to pay your bills and provide for your family may weigh on your going down there or not. So there are some people who can't go, who want to be there but can't be there. And we understand that. We get that. And that's disappointing, right? Because their right to free speech is being impinged upon. Their vocation is being impinged upon, right? Their professionalism is being impinged upon. And so that's really disappointing, right? And
Do
for
they,
some people, it's even a safety issue, right? Depending on where you live and where you serve, it might not be physically safe for you to do that.
I mean, we know what happened to clergy in Minneapolis.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so I know I know she's not with us today. I mean, she's not on this podcast. I hope to get her after. But one of the most impressive, I mean, the people that I've met down there, and I can say this is, um, it is impressive. And I would say like one of the people that really taught me the most was Wesley, who was a local
Mhm.
last year. I interviewed him with a couple other guys who came from out of town, activists from out of town, who were there at the beginning when you had a lot of out of town people. And he's a construction worker
Mhm.
from like South Florida, and he was identifying the stuff going in. I couldn't, but he's like, okay, that this is what they're going to do with this pan. This is what you do with what went in there because this is how people were guessing because it was so secretive. And I know there are there is this thread in the United States of and we see it a lot on from Trump's people, and it's I think one of the things that is a one of these red herrings that they throw out there that the government is spying on everybody, that individual liberty, et cetera, surveillance, but um we know that they are then the ones who are most it's pronouncing it, but people view that as this surveillance, and people are being being watched, and in reality the people who could tell were the people who were construction workers and could see what was going in, but they everything was so secretive in Alligator Alcatraz, like more so than almost any other detention center I've
Mhm.
ever seen. And
Yeah.
I've seen some pretty difficult to get to. So, you have somebody who needs insulin. You have somebody who has, you know, any middle, I mean, I would tell any middle-aged person or anybody with any immunity things, their life is in jeopardy in these jails because
100%.
and this one had the sanitation issues and everything else that people talked about. So it does age them, but the secretive nature, the 5 miles down in this day and age, the 5 miles down the road,
Mhm.
the no cameras, the no room for it was almost as if it was what they wanted to be a Guantanamo, but even Guantanamo has better, as you were saying, and Guantanamo lawyers can visit. I know a group, that was going at the time. You could go if you could get there. You could go.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could, the doctors are there. It's a military base. And so you have the facilities that the U.S. military has to take care of the basic health of people.
And
Um,
and they did that for non-citizens. These
they
are
did
our
that for what they
citizens.
called the hardened or the hardened off the battlefield and what have you. I mean, so many haven't been under trial, but certainly some of them were, they were certainly at the very least prisoners of war.
Our detainees, by and large, are God-fearing, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens, and they're being denied these things
Right.
by
And
our
that's,
government, right? Their tax dollars are being used against them
yeah.
because that facility is being maintained by tax dollars.
Oh,
Tax dollars I am paying, right?
well,
Tax dollars you are paying.
Well, no,
Um,
maybe not, because I think the federal, that was what the last court said was that, because it's the hot potato, who's in charge. This crazy, this is why lawyers, it's funny, we're here, we love it. I mean, and I go back to Brown versus Board of Education. No lawyer in US history has been as brave as Thurgood Marshall, who had to drive around the South in the trunk of a car to not be seen. I mean, there was nobody who had a target more like him. And he won Brown versus Board of Education, and still it meant nothing for so
right,
long. And that's the thing, is you get this great decision. You work so hard, which is why it's great. I mean, these are the great lawyers that do it. These are the great minds. But, you know, um, as we learn early in history, or we ought to learn, the
mhm,
Supreme Court said you can't move the Cherokee Nation out of Georgia. That's theirs. Keep it. And, Andrew Jackson basically said, yeah, I don't see your army. I've got one. And that was pretty crude at the time, but there's a reason, Trump leans on him historically, and he's not wrong. It's part of our history. I mean, one thing about Trump is that, he's not unique. He goes back to that. He goes back to engaging in the roots, and we got, and that's why we got to not be sandbagged by how deep this history is there, and this history of uh, this history of disobeying court orders and disrespect, and just saying, well, I mean, never before in sort of modern history has it's been under the surface, but people have been saying it for a while. The
right.
civil rights judges, because, the Supreme Court rules once, they don't get cases all the time. So
No.
judges then rule, what you're doing in Mecklenburg, Tennessee, or North Carolina is violates the Civil Rights Act.
Mhm.
You can't discriminate. But then they say, well, that's just one judge. They didn't have we had those juries back in segregation that would acquit people. That's just a judge. It's not even so. And who would say that's just one judge?
Right.
And we fall into this normalcy of not questioning our own beliefs, and not and that's where I think it's so are you how do you engage with the other with your clergy, your local brethren, when they say, I'd love to be there but I can't? Or
Well, I mean, that's pretty self-evident. I mean, if they express regret at their inability to be there because of, as they understand it, consequences, ramifications, um, all you can do is pray for them. All you can do is understand that. I mean, you can't, oh, come on, you got to be there. No, I can't ask you to jeopardize your livelihood or jeopardize your ability to pay your bills, to feed your family, to earn a living. Uh, it would be unreasonable to do that, right? And imagine for them, imagine how painful it must be to admit that. I would love to be there. I would be there. But if I go there, this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen. You can't ask that, right? You can't. And so I understand that. And we understand that. But what we do, what we continue to do, and the prayers of the righteous do availeth much, as the Bible tells us. But for those who can come, and for those who are willing to come, and for those who keep coming, and for those who spread the word, who engage with other nonprofit groups, who engage with other civic organizations and get their participation. We're building allyships, we're building partnerships, we're building working relationships with other groups and other entities and other nonprofits. And that's how we're able to keep the numbers sustainable. That's how we're able to attract new people while retaining a core of the people who have been coming, who come over and over again. They see the value in what we're doing. They understand the social justice ramifications, the civil rights, the human rights uh, ramifications. They realize that it wouldn't take much for them to be in a similar situation, in a similar facility. And so, if you don't advocate for them, who will it be next? Will it be journalists? Will it be members of clergy? Right? Will it be teachers who will not comply with the company line? Will it be people who are not overt sympathizers of the federal government right now? So you got to fight
I mean, will
while
it
you
be?
can, as hard as you
Yeah.
can, because you never know who, there's always a next. Who's next? Is it black folks next? Is it people taller than 6 feet tall?
I mean,
Who's next? There's always a next.
is it black folks next? I mean, we saw in the election in Missouri last time. Hopefully, Cori Bush would get her seat back. But yeah, I mean, you will see people who stand up because that's the thing is I made the point the other day, and I make it all the time here is especially here because
Mhm,
Jamie Raskin's our congressman. We don't have two parties in DC and Montgomery County, Maryland. It's
mhm.
very democratic, but it's also happening right under your nose. And there are local folks here doing, showing up, doing things and all that, but still under our nose, this is happening. And believe
100%.
me, we don't have stuff going on. I was just in Montgomery, Alabama. We don't
Mhm.
have stuff going on proportional the other way around. And
No.
power is something that we don't, we're just not going to be inclined to put somebody in and have people follow them just because. We're going to need people, we're going to need organization, and we're going to need convincing to really make the change, right?
And in fact, if you think about it, black folks are already being attacked. Look at the Supreme Court justice, it's just decision that just happened week before last in terms of the black congressional districts based on population. Look at the assault in terms of federal funding for historically black colleges and universities. That's under attack, right? And so voting rights, uh, traditionally, historically black colleges and universities, it's already happening. It's already happening. So it's not what make which brings me down is, oh, are we in a constitutional crisis? Is a constitutional crisis happening? We're in several constitutional crises, right? You keep talking about, is it coming? It's here. It's been here. It's been here on several fronts. You're
And yeah,
asking us to consider what might be happening when it's already here. The tsunami is here. The tidal waves have hit. The damage is being caused now. It's not what if, it's how do we deal with it?
that's right. And how do we get there? And that's why I mean one of the points that I try to make is and I try to make it in Alligator Alcatraz is like I don't I know what they're gonna do.
Mm-hmm,
I've been in actors. I know I saw this in the we saw it in the 80s. We saw the
mm-hmm,
backlash to what was
mm-hmm,
going on in the 70s and anti-war. We saw this on every front. They had, I mean, one thing about the right is that they were able to plug each place, feminism,
mm-hmm,
gay rights,
mm-hmm,
anti-war,
mm-hmm,
uh, sort of Cold War ending, and maybe like not uh, uh, not making certain ideas verboten in the United
mm-hmm,
States,
mm-hmm,
having union attack, like all the different attacks at every single Indian rights was
mm-hmm.
in the 70s. Native American, I mean, that was one of the reasons they, the tribes were powerful because the government realized they're part of the community, all the history in the past, but instead of rectifying and going by and building what they call the more perfect union, we
Mm-hmm.
retreated to saying, wait a minute, this is weakening us. We need to have the control of what we were, which is white culture before,
Right.
which is what happened after, we need to have this culture, and those that follow it are with us, and those that don't aren't. And it's not just straight racial grounds, as you know, with Byron Donalds being your nominee for governor, um, who I don't believe you're going to vote for because he's black. You know,
Absolutely not.
yes,
Yeah, absolutely not. It's if you've noticed, there's so many groups under assault, either socially, legally, financially. Muslims, we just had a mass shooting at an Islamic center in San Diego 2 days ago. Okay. So Muslims are under attack. How many shootings have taken place in synagogues that have put Jewish people at direct
Yeah.
risk? People minding their own business in their own house of worship, worshiping,
Yeah, I know I was just at
right?
Tree of Life in
That's what I'm
Pittsburgh.
talking about.
Yeah.
That's been happening 4 years. Okay. They're under attack, literally under attack, right? Muslims, Catholics are under attack. Black folks are under attack. Women, by virtue of, trying to, legislate their reproductive choices and trying to codify paying them 60 cents on the dollar of their male, you know, peers, they're under attack. So everybody who is not white and male and cisgender and of means is under attack in America right now. We're all under attack, all of us. So when any one of us or any group of us is under attack, it is our moral responsibility to come together and advocate for whoever that group is. Because if we fail to do that, we will be next.
Right. And I
We will
think
be
people,
next.
yeah, and I think it's a time that people can say, hey, you know, we define, because we're certainly not getting it, you know, in our side from
Mhm.
above.
Right.
And that's a good thing. We define what we want. And what's great is you don't want alligator Alcatraz, you do something. You can't, if there is a democracy, it ain't a spectator sport.
It's
And
not.
too often it is. Well, these people are looking at these five quote candidates. It doesn't the candidate that it's like no kings. I would ask one of my biggest issues with the no kings march is, wait a minute, who is the king? Well, who are the kings? I mean, I'm living here in DC in an economy driven by the defense industry.
Mhm.
And that doesn't matter who's in power. That
Right.
Pentagon doesn't shrink.
No, it doesn't. It
And
only it
whether it's
only
Austin
grows.
or Hegseth, doesn't matter. There's still, you know, all
And
those military bases in the Middle East. We're not, all these prisons, this whole thing.
it makes my head explode when I keep hearing people, particularly politicians, say, America is the greatest country in the history of the world. We are the richest nation in the history of the world. We have the greatest military in the history of the world. Well, guess what? President Trump just said yesterday publicly the federal government can no longer afford Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and all these entitlement programs. We need to boil it down to one thing and one thing only, and that's defense.
And we have,
But
yeah,
in the same breath, we have $1.5 billion a day to spend on a war that nobody wants, nobody supports, nobody asks for, nobody needs, right? A war with Iran that is leading directly to $4.75 gas on average in America, which school teachers cannot afford, by the way,
right. And we've
and
talked
police
about the
officers
ICE
cannot
budget.
afford,
And,
and
yep.
and and firemen cannot afford. And so we've got money for that. We can blow up things real good. We got money for that, but we can't solve homelessness.
Well, and I was going to say, actually, that's a perfect segue into what I was going to say is, we have, in the DC area, suburbs relatively wealthy compared to the rest of the country. We have
Correct?
our metro system, and they built this purple line which circles it, and it's going to go east to west, and it's going to bring people. It's going to be this big revolutionary thing. Well, one of my sons always says to me, "Dad, it was approved in '08 or '09, and then China builds like whole cities, and and Alligator Alcatraz. With its garbage, just construction, all the other things happen in a few couple weeks. But this thing's been years. And so the last part is right down the street from me. And they had this station that was not above ground that wasn't unveiled until just now. They took the barriers down and I walked by it last night and it's a homeless encampment. And it's like, okay, this is your new. I mean, if nothing is a juxtaposition of where we are and where we are with all of this stuff. And I think, but you know what? it blows our minds because we see it exacerbate. We've seen a lot of stuff. But I'll tell you who it doesn't necessarily blow the minds of is people, the 18 to 34 demographic. Because even last night with Thomas Massey, and Thomas Massey, for those who don't know, is well known as somebody who refused to take AIPAC money. He's in
Right.
Kentucky. He refused to give any money towards the, genocide in Israel and all that stuff. He refused to do any of that historically. And he also, more so than that, he also wanted the Epstein. He pushed, he sponsored and pushed with Ro Khanna to get the Epstein files
Mhm.
released. So
And
they,
for that, he loses his seat.
I think that was it. Yeah. And
For
so,
that
but 18 to
alone.
34s voted 90% for him.
Here's
It
the
was the
thing.
old people. So when people, it was the people like our demographic was 50-50, I think, but then the over 65s were like, 100% because living off of, non-change fears, whatever that might be. But younger folks recognize the society that they want, and they recognize this, but they're often the voice is hardest to hear. And what really was good about Alligator Alcatraz was seeing younger folks, seeing Ariane, seeing others who were radicalized, not just in her case because her dad is in there, but others who were in the community radicalized. And one of my best interviews I did there was with a young woman who was there with her mom and her mom's church, and she came down and I think she was in Debbie's church. She was, and so she was came down. But when you get younger people down there, and I said, so what's your hope for next time? Are you going to bring your friends? She said, yeah. And once that happens, this is how movements start, right?
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
start not because people have deep political thoughts. Maybe, you do, you're a leader in it. You started, you see things immediately, you're there. But then people afterwards are just saying, this sucks. I don't want this. This is, I don't, it becomes a visceral thing and it's the society we want to bring. So I want to thank you and really everybody that was there. I didn't realize the magnitude because I took a few months off going to other
Right.
parts of the country and I didn't go to
Right.
Minneapolis because everybody else did. But to talk about Baldwin, I mean, go to meaning from here. The only place I went
Hmm.
was Springfield, Ohio. But this podcast has talked to people in Memphis, in Akron, and Springfield, and Baldwin, Missouri, and Tucson, and
Hmm.
in San Diego, a couple
Hmm.
of people running, and people uh, all over the country, and
Hmm.
certainly this is the fifth. I mean, it's almost embarrassing that Florida is, but it really is. I mean, Florida doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't.
And it doesn't. It has a decent history.
It does.
It really does. And so it doesn't have to be this way. And I think, um, I mean, I like the fact that, okay, you got a Democrat mayor in Dade
Hmm.
County. And remember, when Democrats get elected, that just means that they are people. I mean, AOC said it well.
Hmm.
The difference between the two parties is that one party you might be able to push.
Hmm.
The other one, no, it's not their brand. You're not going to get, and we saw that with Massey leaving, and there's a purification of a brand, and we know what they're doing, and it's not hidden.
And
So,
it's such a tragedy because as a former op-ed columnist newspaper, I used to write about politics exclusively, and
mhm,
the Republican Party has such a noble history. Okay, the Republican Party historically
there's been some good
paired with
people.
abolitionists to create the NAACP. That was Republicans that did that. The Republican Party integrated the United States Armed Forces. The Republican Party did that. Without the Republican Party, there would not have been civil rights legislation passed. Okay? If you are a Republican now, you dare not mention any of those facts. That will get you primary, period. And so ultimately, as we prepare to close, I think I do what I do in terms of activism, in terms of what I'm doing down at Alligator Alcatraz and a variety of other social justice initiatives. I do that out of a love for my country, out of a love for God, love for God's people. I somehow maintain optimism that things are bad now, but things can always get better. And rather than sitting there and clutching my pearls and standing by idly and shrugging my shoulders, I can be a part of making my corner of the world a bigger, better, brighter place. I choose to do that. I've got small children. I want America to be better for them and for their unborn children, for your children, and for your unborn grandchildren. It can be better. And I want to be a part of making it better. And so if my children later in life, when they're grown ups, or my grandchildren ask me, hey, during the bad old days of the 2020s, what did you do, Grandpa? How did you respond? I will be able to tell them what I did or show them what I did, video clips, newspaper headings. I can show them that I was active and let them make up their own minds
And I'll tell
rather
you
than
what,
saying, oh, I just want to keep my head down and wait for the day that things will get better.
and I'll tell you what, people who and we know this, it's indescribable how good the community is
Mm,
and how I mean, I know I'm still friends. I mean, people have come back to me. I'm still friends with the people that I worked on, the social justice stuff with in Florida in the 80s. I'm still friends with them no matter where they are. Some of them are here. Some I see like all the time. They're in DC now.
mhm.
Even whatever they've done over their careers, they hearken. That's something that is a harkens back and it forms a foundation and making and it allows you to be into a community and meet people like, you know, Ariane. So you don't just have an opinion, but you know what it's like for the family of somebody. And I can tell you, look, I've been doing this for a long time. Before I went to law school, kind of kicking and screaming, after studying history to do something practical. I was, activist and all that. And I still was blown away by meeting people there. And when you said, you've got your kids and all that, I was thought of one of the better quotes that was in any of my episodes that I've done was from Josh, who's Ruben, who started Witness at the Border, and he's down there in August, and he's in New York, and he's an older guy, older Jewish guy, retired, and he's like, very familiar to me, older, it's like, okay. And he said, and I said, Josh, so, my Jewish mother came in, came into I'm like, Josh, stay in the shade. Don't show me. He's showing me the road, and it's like middle of the day, August, Everglades. And he said to me, I said, well, what got you doing? He goes, back in 2018 when there were the kids in cages, the borders and all that, he said he was retired, computer tech, I believe, or developer, and he said I was tired. I didn't want to throw my shoe at the TV watching it. And I
I know that
guarantee
feeling.
you, yep, and I guarantee you that Josh has added time to his life and satisfying. And I know I talked to my mom's when my mom was living in Delray in 2019. I talked at her current events group and they filled the room. And I had to tell them when I was explaining things up there, they were like, well, where can we find Rubio? Because he was senator then, and go to his office and protest. I said, it is August, guys. You are in walkers. You will not be hydrated enough. Make phone calls. You guys
Mhm.
are great on the phone. Make
Right.
phone calls. Don't go out there. But people are because and that's what energizes them. And this is what gets people out, and it's infectious. I've noticed that
Ariane,
infection.
Ariane is a good friend. She's an activist right now because of what happened to her father, what
Mhm.
is happening to her father. And she is working with Worker Circle, which is great right now. She could very easily be a senator, very easily. Okay. 15, 20 years from now, she could be a congresswoman. She could be a senator. So we don't know what good can come from this. The fact of the matter is, common sense is no longer common and freedom ain't free.
No, and we
So
can.
anything worth having, you got to fight for and
And
you
one
got to
thing we
keep
yep,
fighting.
and one thing we know that I always credit Trump for, as they say, showing his ass, showing theirs, is
Mhm.
the rules aren't there. And you know what? The rules aren't there, and we saw that in Minneapolis, and we saw that with whistles, and we saw that the rules aren't there. And the rule for you guys was, hey, this is a dangerous place. There's snakes. No one's going to come out here to protest because no one protests in Louisiana or anything.
Right, right.
But you
I
have the ability that the Miami Herald, no matter how reluctant and all that,
mhm,
they're there.
mhm.
They had to come out. You've
Right.
you're still Florida. It's super rural. That's
Hmm.
the incredible thing about it. And I'm saying this from somebody who is amazed by rural things because I grew up on the East Coast. So people,
Yeah.
I used to think, this is a joke. I used to, we're so, we're so provincial and myopic. I used to think Florida was one of the biggest geographical states in the country. And I have a graduate degree in history, U.S.
Hmm.
history, but I just never, until I went out west and drove and I worked with migrant farm workers and I had an area the size of my home state with like 40,000 people in it. And I realized, wow, but the Everglades is different in
Yeah.
that you're in the middle of nowhere. You're right.
Yeah.
There's no gas stations within 20 miles. There's no bathrooms. There's nothing.
Right.
But
It's remote.
if you go 40 miles, you're in the Miami.
You're in Miami. So
Yeah,
it's Dade County. It's so interesting. But I
yeah.
think with the president ultimately, I don't think well, I'm fairly certain that history will judge him very harshly. But the one service he has provided for us completely, unexpectedly, is that he has laid bare the myth. He has exposed the myth that the founding fathers thought of everything. The founding fathers based compliance. They thought that every office holder of the presidency of the Oval Office would be a noble person, that that person could be reasonable, that that person would obey the rules and honor the rule of law. And ultimately, the last line of defense that they put in place was shame, that the office holder of the Oval Office could be shamed into doing the right thing or browbeaten into doing the right thing. This is what happens if you have a president who is immune to shame, who does not care about self aggrandizement, who is dedicated to corrupt activities, right? And so once sanity comes back into play, we have to make sure that any and every holder of the Oval Office, every POTUS moving forward, cannot be allowed to repeat these injustices.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't, as a Jew with family within the Holocaust, I'm careful with my Hitler analogies and I don't, throwing it out there. But I think
Mhm.
one, thing that is true is that he got elected, him and others, any sort of right-wing populism.
Mhm.
And we've had that in the US and it
Mhm.
has gotten to a certain point, but
Mhm.
influenced, but not always been, but it's been elected, in certain
Mhm.
places, right-wing populism. And so the, but the conditions are there when there is no, when the ground is seated. Immigration is a problem. We need to build up the wall, but not 50 miles, 48. We need to do, because nobody wants something unsatisfying. It's like, for people who are drinking, when it's like when you're at a ball game in the seventh inning when they call last beer and everybody looks around, it's like, okay, what if I want one in the eighth? What do I do? Do I save it? Like it's a weird thing. Like that's a weird thing. Like you're cutting them off, so therefore they're not going to get drunk. It's like, okay, so we're saying you need to have vaccines, but it's up to the state to do it, or you can do immigration detention, but you need to go through these processes. No, we don't, because you set up it's like the paradigm needs to change and the power structure needs to change. And that's a good thing. And I think it's
It
what
is,
young people want because young
yeah,
people are used to that. And I think that this is the voice there. Like if none of these detention centers existed and that money was used towards community, what one of the examples, and when I was teaching, I'm going to close. You brought up all of these things, and I think they fit well in here. Some of the things in my own past, and that have come of as when I was teaching. One of the things I did was I had everybody to do a case study of certain towns. Minneapolis was the only city, but I had them focus on the Somali community and how communities in the U.S. dealt with influx of immigrants. Sometimes it was for a business like Dalton, Georgia. You had the Middle Eastern carpet business coming in there. You had, different areas where people came, and Dayton, Ohio had a compact basically instructing all of its institutions how to integrate ESL teachers, training the police on how people react to police, because, people from authoritarian countries with run by, military dictatorships are going to react differently to the police telling them to stop or stopping them, then other places they're going to be different, and people are going to just the needs of the community. And it's called the Dayton Compact. And it's funny because you realize Dayton is a very Catholic city. Its university is Catholic. It's a very Catholic city, but Dayton, Ohio is one of them. And so the community, and so people don't always see, this is why I have a history part that I want to do that I do on here too, is that it, there is that part of us too, of how these communities came and how um interesting it is. Like Ybor City, what is it? Where did it come? Like in Tampa, like these places. And authoritarianism and where we're going and anti-immigrant stuff relies on ignorance. It relies on ignorance, and it relies on people not being curious and people taking orders. And the more people are out there, the more, Ariane and others talk about their experiences and get out there, the more things will change slowly. And but I think the first places we got to hit are these, like, our allies or your pastors, to empower them, the people in their congregation, to empower it so that people are like, wow, that's not a bad thing she or he is doing. So anyway, well, we'll be back. We're doing several from here.
Yeah,
I don't think the saga is over. And
not at all.
I can't not resist what's going on in Florida, because Florida, and with the election coming up, I want to see the issue, and I want to see, people out there forcing whatever the Democratic candidates are running. I know one of them came to the rally the other day. So to just say, no, this is what we want as a state, as a paradigm. So, Reverend Jones, thank you so much. Before we
Hey, it
go,
was an honor.
and
It was an
I
honor
know
and a
you did.
privilege.
I know you did say one thing that did excite you, that in general to me, but one
Mhm.
thing as you're going out today, as you're thinking about Sunday, one thing that gives you optimism and makes you positive, besides what you were talking about, people coming out from the beginning and surprising you. One other thing.
I love that people are getting involved and they're calling their representatives, they're calling their congressperson, they're calling their senators. They're making efforts to get informed on the issues. They're making phone calls. They're talking to their friends. Um, they're signing up for our charter buses, free charter buses on Sundays to go and take part. Um, they want to be boots on the ground. They're making financial contributions to help the detainees' families. They're doing everything they can to make a positive difference, to make an impact um, for the greatest good. And that's always encouraging to see, right? They're not sticking their heads in the sand. They're not waiting on someone else to do something about it. They are actively choosing to be the change they want to see. And that is incredibly encouraging to me. And we just want to expand on that. We just want to keep that going because it's needed.
And for me, as I always throw myself into do one too, is I I'm always encouraged when I see, activists of my own background, and to see, like, the worker circle play such a prominent role was really encouraging. It's an old organization, and to just say, look, workers, you know, it 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 just builds on coalition, because I really do believe that coalitions strengthen us. And the fact that you're out there and the noise of what's in Washington isn't, you know, as my grandfather would say, don't pay attention to that. It's a hard thing to say, and it makes no sense when you put it in this context, but in a way it does, because I think when you're out there and you just see, hey, there's oranges over here. The bus driver was making sure people had water, probably at your insistence, but it was the but just made, and everybody was looking out for each other, and it still sits with me 2 weeks later. And I do have faith that in these elections, I don't expect, all great people to be elected, even as Democrats, but I do know that this is something that is out there and they have to address, and that's a good thing. So, Reverend Jones, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to Stephanie Buatois, producer, and Jeff Barsky and Pete Kovitz for the sound, and for all of you for listening. And so if you're watching on YouTube, please, YouTube is subscribe and like. And if you're on Spotify, give it the 5 stars. And we're also on Instagram and TikTok. So th those are new. So so go on those and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate
take
it.
it. All right, you take
Anytime.
care. Sure. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.